I'd like to bring this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, meeting number 36, and we're studying security issues raised by the former Minister of Foreign Affairs. I will give an opportunity for the cameras to vacate the room. I'd like to welcome to our committee Mr. Michel Junot-Katsua, former Senior Intelligence Officer at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The usual practice at this committee, sir, is to allow you an opening statement of approximately 10 minutes, and then I'm sure there will be some questions and comments. And we have a slightly abbreviated session because of the votes. I hope you understand. So we won't waste any more time. We'll let you go ahead, and if there's any other introduction of yourself you think I've omitted, please go ahead and do that at the beginning. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think a copy of my introductory comments have been distributed. You can follow. They are both in English and French. So please allow me to maybe read them to still keep a coherent line in my discourse. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs du Comité.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak to you about my experience and expertise with committee members. I would also like to emphasize that I didn't prepare a brief, given that it was at the committee's request that I've come here today to testify. So I'm here to share with you my comments based on my experience that extends over a period of over 30 years in the area of security intelligence, 21 of which were within the RCMP and CSIS.
I was unable to prepare a suitable translation for my initial comments. I hope you will forgive me for that shortcoming and allow me to continue mainly in French for the introduction. I will be, of course, totally comfortable to answer any question in English as needed. Dans l'espoir de vous aider à...
In the hope of helping you understand the situation more quickly, I would like to give you an initial evaluation as I see it. My review is based on information that has been made public in the media, and at no time have I had access to privileged or classified information of a government department or agency. My study is based on my knowledge of this community and on federal government policy that I used and applied for over 2 decades. I add to that my knowledge of the constraints that are often unknown to the public, but which face investigators of the government who are responsible for security clearance checks or security clearances.
Point of view of security, and strictly security, I regret having to say that the unfortunate situation of Mr. Bernier does not strictly concern his private life. The epicenter of this case questioned the integrity and measures put in place to protect classified information, the individual handling of it, and as well as the reputation and credibility of the Canadian government. To this end, it is necessary to recognize that for several decades and well before September 11, 2001, tireless work was carried out by security specialists of the Canadian government to establish and set up a system aiming to ensure the protection not only of information but also of the individuals who are in possession or in contact with this information. Excuse me. With this intention, a combination of action was implemented, going from the use of technology to investigation and routine monitoring.
For individuals, everything starts with an investigation and follow-up on the private life of the people who have access to our national secrets. It goes without saying that requests and intrusion into the private lives of federal employees and our elected people have limits. We must recognize that it is necessary to go to a certain extent in our research and in the questions we ask. And this is often done with the consent of the individuals who have sought to apply for security clearance. This first investigation is to find out, first of all, their reliability and their vulnerability. I'm pleased and proud to, as a Canadian, to know from experience that the balance has been established for a number of years. There is a balance between the integrity of the system, the need to know the interference of the institutions, and the responsibility of individuals. We cannot ask the RCMP or CSIS to surveil people 24/7, employees 24/7, even less for our elected people or people who are appointed to ministerial positions. The opposite could lead us to get into a system such as the one the U.S. knew at the time of J. Edgar Hoover, where suspicion and paranoia dominated the management of security in the country. Worse, excesses in the name of security could result in a matter similar to Watergate. However, when they were requested, it is the duty of these institutions to inform the authorities of the potential or immediate threat that was detected.
Between the need for the government to obtain more information from its employee and the right of these individuals to privacy. It is necessary to remember when an individual receives a security clearance, there is a contractual agreement. I will be coming back about this notion of contractual agreement because it is epicenter into the notion of responsibility that is carried on by the individual as well. So this contractual agreement between the person and his or her department that could translate into, roughly, if I can paraphrase, we will not search continuously in your private life. We will not watch you constantly, but in return, you must report to us any situation which could, according to you or any reasonable person, be exploited against you and possibly drive you to act in such a way that would endanger national security or your life. The concept of contractual agreement is very important in this case in order to understand the limits which the system have self-imposed to prevent abuses of an inquisitive nature. Cela dit, je crois sincèrement.
That said, I sincerely think that we have one of the most sophisticated and professional systems in the world. It is constantly reviewed and improved by government experts. Is it perfect? Probably not. As Montesquieu said, people will always be people. And in the area of security, the human factor constantly remains the weakest link in the chain. If I might now, I would like to make a few specific comments on Mr. Bernier's unfortunate situation. This matter is two stories in one. From the point of view of national security, there are two main components with a number of subcomponents and subsequent ramifications. The fact that a secret document was forgotten in the hands of a non-authorized person, and Mr. Bernier's relationship with an individual who, in her own words, had some connections with influential members of organized crime. The forgetting of classified documents.
Confession, it is obvious that there was a breach of security. Such situation is clearly identified in the federal government policies when it comes to handling classified information and is regarded as being a serious incident that can lead, according to circumstances and documents involved, to dismissal of the employee. In this case, however, important questions remain. Once again, strictly from the point of view of national security, and required an investigation by the RCMP. It is required, sorry. It is essential at this point to determine the extent of any damage and to try to circumvent the negative effect. This responsibility is all the more important since the information left at Ms. Julie Couillard's residence related to NATO and was therefore received from our allies. There are thus three groups concerned which now need to know the range of the damages. Les dirigeants gouvernementaux
government leaders, from the employees of the Department of Foreign Affairs to the Prime Minister of Canada and to those in charge of security, our international partners, from our allies in NATO, but also to all other countries that share confidential and privileged information in the area of military, security, commercial, or other matters, the people of Canada, who every day gives confidential and personal information to the government and who expect this information to be protected. With respect to the first group, we must know the ins and outs of the story to estimate the damage, but particularly to determine whether improvements can be made to Canadian policy in the area of the protection and management of classified documents to ensure the integrity of the system. For our international partners, it is fundamental to know whether this is an exceptional situation or whether it represents a systematic or systemic problem. The sharing of privileged information is crucial in our relations with allies, and the leak of classified information may have significant repercussions on Canada's reputation and the confidence people have in us now or in the future. I would like to add an aside at this point. With respect to Canada's reputation in the area of security, we have the opportunity to be able to rely on an excellent past record or track record, which is well known internationally, and which means that a number will see that although this is an extraordinary situation, we'll see that this is an extraordinary situation. That is, it is not usual practice. Canada is known and envied as a serious country with an excellent system and some very professional public servants. I do not think it will be difficult to correct the situation with our allies, but some explanation, however embarrassing, will be required. The people of Canada, like the two other groups, need to know that this is not a normal situation, but particularly to have their confidence restored with respect to the integrity and professionalism of the people who work for the government, both elected people and officials. The second aspect of the situation is Mr. Bernier's relationship with a person with links to organized crime.
Classified and significant information start with establishing a system based on shared responsibilities between few parties. For the need of our discussion today, I would like to regroup them as follows: the management, the individual who received the security clearance, and the agencies responsible for security, which include DFID, PCO, Prime Minister's Office, and any official agency responsible for investigating or protecting the information. Each one has a role and well-established responsibility which are defined in various policy of the public office. Obtaining a security clearance is not a right, but a privilege. Privilege which is sealed by a contractual agreement between the individual who received it and the Canadian government. When a person is in a job required to read or handle classified information, this person must initially qualify to obtain a security clearance. A request from management via the department's security officer will be sent to CSIS, which will perform the necessary investigation. In this case, because Mr. Bernier's high-profile position, he was to receive a top-secret special access security clearance, the highest within the federal government. This level 3 requires an investigation of that person into the last 20 years. A form must be completed and submitted where it would list the biographical data, including names, date of birth, and current address of all the members of his or her family and immediate in-laws. Additionally, his or her old residence, school, when needed, former employers, and 2 references are also included. Therefore, a specialized CSIS investigator will go to these various places and will interview the neighbors, former employees, landlords, and any other people deemed to be necessary. This is the start. This is the standard for the federal employees.
As to whether or not an investigation is done of the partners of elected people? The answer is yes, indirectly. What I mean is that, of course, the individual is not the main subject of the investigation, but in some aspects of the interviews in the field, the investigator will try to determine, to find out a little about the person. For example, he will ask the present or past neighbors to get a better idea about the type of couple it is. He will find out how their dealings were with them, how they behave generally, and even ask questions about the quality of their personal relationship or their personality. Once again, these questions are designed to find out the main three things of the inquiry, namely integrity, reliability, and vulnerability of the person. Once the investigation is over, the results with recommendations are given to the department in question. If a sensitive point came up in the investigator, which does not result in an automatic rejection of the application, but which is problematic, it is discussed with the manager, who will have the prerogative to decide whether he or she can live with the situation. In other words, risk management is up to them. When the person is accepted, there is a contract signed with that person, and the person must make a commitment to protect the information that they're given. There are also some information sessions as to how to manage this information. In addition, they have to disclose on their own initiative any changes in their personal situation or professional situation, and or any situation that could put the person in any sort of vulnerable position. It is this shared responsibility and this balance to which I was referring earlier. In conclusion, I would like to say that the measures I've just outlined apply to all federal employees. What changes in the current case is the political and public nature of the case. I would say that this is probably the Achilles heel of the system. Not that it is inherent to the government in place, but the measures or constraints have always existed. It is rather the nature of the beast, the political beast, and that means that there has to be some rigor for the security. I suspect that all elected people, particularly highly placed ministers, are treated differently, a much less rigorous process. This is what I call the confrontation between policy on security and real policy. Because of the requirements of a public life, which is heavily covered in the media, where image is so important, this situation can be harmful to the work of people in charge of security. Can we imagine an CSIS investigator going to ask questions of the former employer of a minister or of his current or past neighbors? We cannot and we do not want to see the RCMP or CSIS looking around in the private lives of our elected people 24/7. That is obvious, but on the other hand, it is necessary that these elected people be cooperative and to show judgment in the management of their personal affairs. From the outset, the system was intuitively established some control points. For example, in the choice of candidates, there are, in some cases, some review that is done by the officials of the political party before the candidacy is supported. At least that is desirable. Let us say that in most of the cases there's a great deal of flexibility, but there is some screening that is done. But when the time comes to choose among newly elected people, the people who will get cabinet positions, everything changes between the established policies in the federal government. How can we reconcile this? Who should give in to the other? Does the Privy Council have a more important role in informing the RCMP of new people who are close to the entourage of the ministers? That is the Achilles heel of the system.
Reveal, and from my experience as a federal investigator, I believe that you are dealing with a situation of double standard, in which elected officials are exempt from submitting themselves to the same security standard imposed on federal employees. In all fairness, it is also important to add that the current government is not responsible for this situation. Unfortunately, this situation has prevailed for decades, and all previous governments have enjoyed the same loophole. So the questions are, should one re-examine this approach? Can one ensure that there is, as we speak, no other situation like Mr. Bernier? To ask less of our elected official is inevitably a sustainable weakening of the system and threatening its integrity.
From the point of view of an investigator, there are always a number of questions outstanding that require answers. Thank you.
We'll go immediately to the Liberal Party. Mr. Desange, are you going to lead off?
Thank you.
I must tell, we're going to have a slightly abbreviated session for questions. You'll probably have a minute less than normal.
Okay.
5 or 6 minutes.
So we will have just probably one round or 2 rounds?
Well, we'll have 1 round.
Only 1 round, possibly?
Barely one. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
all right. I will split my time with my colleague.
Sure.
Mr. Juno Katsuya, thank you very much. Here are, without any preface, here are a couple of questions where I want you to reaffirm. You have said that clearly the documents, from what we know, were left, unclassified documents were left at an unsecure location. Rules were breached, national security breach occurred, and you believe that an RCMP investigation is required to clear the air, both for NATO and other allies and friends, for our own government leaders, and for the individuals who actually provide information to the government so that they are assured that the government's the information is appropriately protected.
Yes.
Am I correct?
You are correct.
And to your knowledge and to my knowledge, there's no RCMP investigation at this point, at least known to us.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. The second question you in fact said, you raised, is with respect to the security clearance. Very brief question. Do you know if when Mr. Bernier may have been cleared for the industry minister's portfolio, that there may have to be a second clearance and second review? Is the standard of clearance different for industry and foreign affairs?
No. The various security clearance, the main 3 levels that exist, are basically standard across the board. Okay. If Mr. Bernier had a top secret special access clearance, excuse me, when he was the industry minister, that would have been capable to pass along with him when he went. The only thing, if I may add, the only thing that would have changed is the special access. The special access says that you are limited to, on a need-to-know basis, to see certain information that others might not know. In this particular case, it might be possible, and again, it is to be confirmed, that somebody in the industry is allowed to see certain information that it's not allowed to be seen with the foreign affair, and vice versa.
I have just one more question, and that is, in fact, RCMP, we understand, had Madame Kuya under surveillance back in 1998. According to the information that's available, she had very deep connections with organized crime, the mobs and the bikers. Do you think under those circumstances, CSIS and or the RCMP would look into her background and these matters if it came to their attention that she was associating with the Foreign Affairs Minister on a regular basis?
I think the key word that you just mentioned, if it came to their attention. That's the key element here. As I mentioned in my introductory comments, we do not want and we do not advocate for a 24/7 surveillance or monitoring of our elected officials. That would be almost a repressive regime to a certain extent. What we are saying basically is that if the information came somehow, somewhere to the knowledge of the RCMP and CSIS, in that perspective, they will certainly take the mandate to investigate and then report directly to the PMO.
Thank you.
I think there's about a minute left.
Just one moment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Juno Katsuya, two things. You said clearly at the beginning of your remarks that Mr. Bernier's situation doesn't have to do just with his private life. It's not just about his private life. Later on in your remarks, you talked about an investigation designed to look at the integrity, reliability, and vulnerability of an elected person or someone who's trying to get security clearance. Now you say that if the RCMP or CSIS had known about Mr. Bernier's relationship with Ms. Couillard, then there should have been an investigation. Answer: it is logical under the current system that a more in-depth investigation would have been done. Ms. Couillard, in her interview, said that she told Mr. Bernier about her ties to organized crime shortly after they met. So, if Mr. Bernier had shown judgment, he should have immediately revealed that information to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs or someone who would have informed CSIS and the RCMP. Exactly. Those are the policies and procedures of the federal government. Do I still have a little time up? No. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Juno Katsuya. Mr. Juno. In Canada, to help with investigations, over the years, there have been some banks of criminal information established. Is that not correct? Yes. Oh, sorry. You have to say something. You can't just nod your head here. There are only some police officers who are authorized to consult those criminal data banks on the need-to-know basis. Now, there are some at the RCMP. There are some available to do this type of investigation. Yes. In these criminal data banks, am I to understand that we have people who have just been found guilty, or is it all people who, for one reason or another, are thought to be part of a criminal organization? There are different criminal data banks, and depending on the one that you look at, there are different types of information. For example, there's CPIC, the Canadian Police Information Centre, and the CRPQ, which are two data banks that particularly collect convictions for people who were found guilty of indictable offences. And those are accessible to all police officers, to all mandated police forces. But the others are for other people. The other data banks that you're referring to are data banks that are much more limited, that contain information on inter-associations, activities, and other more sensitive information that are needed by investigators. So the number of people who have close ties with organized crime, well, they should be in those data banks, the names of those people. In the investigations we do of people in the entourage of a minister, even the partner, is it complicated to consult those data banks? Well, the system is a little bit slow for bureaucratic reasons because it's not necessarily given to all police officers, even though they have access. They're not going to necessarily have access to other police forces' information. The CSIS doesn't have direct access to CRPQ or to the data bank of the Quebec Police Force. You have to go through liaison officers who are appointed in each respective organization. An official request is made to check whether there is any negative information about an individual. But once you get the authorization or that qualification, all you need to do is to enter the person's name on an electronic keyboard, and that's the consultation. If there is an agreement between the police forces or the institutions, yes, that's all you would have to do. But in the fight against organized crime in Quebec recently, the banks were combined. Is that not right? Yes. So the RCMP, the Quebec Police Force, Montreal Police, the main characteristic is that. But access to this information is limited to certain people who have this security clearance because, as you will understand, I'm sure, unfortunately, there are some people that do get into the police systems and could have access to the information that could be harmful to police investigation. So access is limited even within the police organization to certain pre-qualified individuals. Since we've got so little time, I would like you to comment. The French world, I can't think about, I can't remember here, but about the pattern you've seen in the case of Julie Couillard. Well, just about the information that we've seen in the media and just in terms of security, well, I would say that all the information that has been revealed would encourage any investigator to search more. There was ongoing connection with a number of members of organized crime, and that caused a serious problem, particularly because the organization in question here, we're talking about the Hells Angels and their associated club. That is a sophisticated enough organization that it had infiltration schemes within certain federal and provincial organizations and in certain law enforcement agencies. So it's a very sophisticated organization. We see a lady here with repeated relationships with a number of people with ties to organized crime. That is in itself very problematic and would mean that any investigator should look much further. She also said herself that there were major issues raised. She told the media that she chose an event where Mr. Bernier was going to be present, that she was at his table. She sat beside him at the dinner table. She was pleasant with him the whole evening. She even revealed what dress she was wearing because she's saying it was the same one that she wore for the swearing-in ceremony, which display her natural assets. They had a great evening together, and subsequently, according to her, they ended up at the hotel bar where Mr. Bernier was staying. In my field, intelligence and police, that's a classic recruitment exercise.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for being here. I will do my questions as quickly as I can. I was pleased to hear you say that you think the RCMP should be investigating this because it is the position that the federal New Democrats have taken since the beginning, that this should be an RCMP investigation. From what you have said, then, we can make the not assumption, but we can conclude that Mr. Bernier broke his contractual agreement that he signed by not revealing that information to the Prime Minister.
Agree.
Secondly, would all cabinet ministers be at the same level of security?
Yes, likely so, because the information within the cabinet are among the most sensitive information that the government.
Right, because they would all have access to classified information of some kind, right?
Top secret.
Although perhaps other ministers of even a higher level. All right, then. If people changed positions in cabinet, given they already have a security 3 level, would there be any further investigation done of them if they were taking on what is even a more highly sensitive portfolio, or is that level 3 is about as high as that's?
It's the ceiling.
Okay. I think I recall reading that Ms. Couillard and Mr. Bernier were at a reception or with President Bush. Would everybody who was at, if you have any experience, would everybody who was at a reception with President Bush have had to have some security clearance to be there?
From my experience, what would happen is that the American authority will rely on the Canadian authority to have conducted the security clearance and the background check in advance. And therefore, when the Canadian authorities vouch for that person, the green light is given. All right.
So then the American authorities could safely expect then that the Canadian authorities had checked the background of Ms. Couillard and approved it.
Indeed,
she was there with Mr. Bernier. Next. should all cabinet ministers then be, because you're saying it is a double standard, should cabinet ministers be, because and you've also said it's the weak link, should they be subject to the same level of at least initial scrutiny that a federal employee would be?
In my humble opinion, yes.
Okay. Should partners of cabinet ministers be subject to some kind of security check?
No more or less what is currently conducted for any federal employee. Which basically, when we, as the example I share with you, when we are investigating the person, we will unavoidably ask questions about the relationship of the couple, relationship of the spouse.
That's the indirect way.
That's the indirect way
that you spoke of.
That's right. To go any further might not necessarily be necessary, and is also costly. So there's a sort of a trade-off to do here.
My last point then would be, based on your experience, and partially, I guess, based on mine as spending 10 years in a provincial cabinet, most significantly, very classified information would be numbered, would be signed out to to individuals, and if it was not returned, then somebody would be knocking on my door saying, where is the classified information that you have possession of? Is that a tracking system that has ever been in place?
This is what the federal policy dictates as well.
That it is signed out to a particular individual?
You must keep, the security officer must keep the log. The documents are numbered or at least identified, the date and time it is taken out, and the date and time it is returned.
So can you see any reason, in your experience, that there would be documents missing for 5 weeks and no one would notice?
That would be considered a security breach as well, and a breach in the policies.
Okay. And I guess for just one moment, I would not take issue with you necessarily, but just because governments have always done it that way doesn't mean they have to keep doing it that way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the witness for being here today. I think you bring some insight into the matter, and I listened very closely to your introduction and to many of your answers. And what I find most interesting is that some of what you've told us, I think, is the way it is, and some of what you've suggested to us is maybe the way it should be. But in fact, if I understood you correctly, and I'm certainly open for you to tell me otherwise, that the practices that are taking place today are no different than the practices that took place 5 years ago with respect to individuals filling those positions and the background checks that take place. And that being the case, is there any difference in this situation than any other minister in the last several governments in the background checks that would have applied to them? And perhaps more importantly in this case is that when that minister was appointed to that position, the background checks, his friends and acquaintances have changed in that length of time. Would there have been any change in that position from previous to today?
Thank you very much. Technically, it's difficult for me to be capable to compare information that I don't have on hand currently of if there was any changes. As much as I can say and as much as I can assess from the information that was publicly released, there is no reason to believe that there is any changes that occurred between the previous practices and the current practices. What I tried to stress in my introductory comments was the fact that, unfortunately, we are confronted to having a set of policies in place, and the constraint or the difficulties to implement certain of those policies, because, respectfully, the people in position like Mr. Bernier have a very, very public and mediated or public and covered perspective.
Okay, but if I might suggest that there are policies that we have, and perhaps policies that we wish we had, or whatever the case may be, but in fact, those policies, in fact, that are in place are the same today as they were.
To the best of my knowledge, okay. Yes.
So then when we get to the supposition about who knew what when, would it also be your opinion that if there's discussion taking place in places like beauty shops with other MPs, that they would know or ought to have known or were concerned, or people in this House who claim to have a great deal of knowledge of the pasts of some people, that they would then still have some obligation to bring those issues forward? It's not only authorities, like the RCMP or CISAs, if someone else, in fact, knows that information, they may very well bring that information forward so that the information is known as opposed to sitting on it.
Agreed. As it is respectively the responsibility of the individual himself or herself to reveal such information when they assess that it can be dangerous. If somebody comes in contact or in possession of information that could reveal that there is maybe a weakness within the system, it is also the responsibility of that individuals to share that information with the proper authorities. This information should have been transmitted and shared with anybody who received a security clearance at the time of where they received their security clearance and when they were indoctrinated with such a thing.
Okay. And the issue that we're dealing with here is, in fact, the documents being left in an inappropriate place that have now been returned, and now the review is being conducted by that ministry to determine the process of handling documents. Is that appropriate?
Here, I might have difficulties with the fact that the people of the ministry, or the department, I should say, are conducting an investigation, which obviously is tainted by allegation of link to an organized crime, or at least in the past. I suspect they might not have the experience to necessarily investigate, and unlikely to have the access that a similar police department like the RCMP will have when they go and talk to a counterpart like la Sûreté du Québec, QPP.
But if they have the authority to contact other government agencies to assist in that process, that would then be appropriate?
Potentially.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll suspend for a moment to bring in our next witnesses. Thank you. We're pressed for time, so we'll reconvene. Let's clear the room and begin the second part of our meeting, please. Okay, we'd like to welcome the RCMP to the. I'm sorry, all cameras are supposed to be. Do you have approval to be in here? Yes. Oh, okay. For the first 2 minutes. Yeah. Okay. I think I will just ask the Assistant Commissioner to introduce himself. We welcome you all to the panel, and maybe you can introduce the people that are there with you. And we have a slightly abbreviated session because of votes in the House. Unfortunately, we have to quit at 5:30. So if you have an opening statement of approximately 10 minutes, we would welcome that, and then we'll go to questions and comments. Thank you very much for coming, sir. Anytime you're ready, you may begin.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable members. My name is Raf Sukar. I am the Deputy Commissioner responsible for federal policing in the RCMP. And with me today is Mr. Bob Polson, who has recently taken over as the Assistant Commissioner for National Security, Criminal Investigations, and Mr. Christian Roy with the RCMP Legal Services. At the invitation of the committee, we're here to outline the RCMP's role in conducting pre-appointment background checks on candidates for ministerial office. Je vais fournir au comité de l'information.
I will provide information to the committee and answers to the questions of its members to the extent that I can. For a number of reasons, including an individual's privacy, there are limitations to what comments the RCMP can make. You will understand that the RCMP does not generally comment on specific files or cases or otherwise disclose the contents of its files in relation to specific individuals. This is to protect the integrity of our processes and to protect the privacy of those individuals, including those against whom no charges have been laid.
Generally comment on specific files or cases or otherwise disclose the contents of its files in relation to specific individuals. This is to protect the integrity of our processes and to protect the privacy of those individuals, including those against whom no charges have been laid. Therefore, I will not discuss the results of any specific pre-appointment background check today. The RCMP is involved in two types of background check processes, and it is important to distinguish between both of them. The first is pre-appointment background checks on candidates for certain public offices, which take place in advance of an appointment to senior government office, and the second is the security clearance process. Our role in each is different. It is also important to identify the specific roles that the RCMP plays in each of these two separate processes. In support of the Privy Council Office, the RCMP conducts pre-appointment background checks on a variety of senior public officials in advancement of their appointment, including ministers, senators, Privy Councillors, heads of agencies, heads of Crown corporations, heads of Canadian missions, and directors of the Bank of Canada. Le processus complet est défini par les lignes.
The full process is defined by guidelines issued by the Clerk of the Privy Council and is administered by the Director of Security Operations at the Privy Council Office. Requests for checks are sent in writing by the Director of Security Operations at PCO on behalf of the Clerk of the Privy Council to the Commissioner of the RCMP.
Held in the utmost confidence and are conducted on the names provided by the Director of Security Operations only, and not on any spouse, partner, or immediate family or associate of those individuals named. These checks are limited to database checks only, such as criminal record checks and criminal intelligence files. This would include, where applicable, checks with other provincial and municipal police forces. But these checks do not include additional investigative measures such as neighborhood inquiries. Each check is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. In the event that information suggests the possibility of criminal activity or involvement in a current or past investigation, the RCMP will analyze that information for accuracy, reliability, or relevance, and communicate this information to PCO. The general procedure for reporting the result of a check that identifies information or intelligence that may be of concern is to forward that information to the Director of Security Operations at the Privy Council Office. Toute question additionnelle.
Any additional questions about pre-appointment background checks are best addressed by the PCO, who manage and direct the process. Security clearances are separate from the pre-appointment background check process. A security clearance assesses the reliability and loyalty of individuals before they are given access to classified information.
It includes a number of additional steps. For example, in addition to a police record check, a security clearance also includes a reliability check of an individual's degrees, for example, professional qualifications, employments. Depending on the level of security clearance, it may also involve interviews with individuals' family members, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, former employees, and/or neighbors. Security clearances are governed by the government's security policy issued by Treasury Board, and each federal department is responsible for its own security clearances. This includes assessing the appropriate level of security clearance required for each position within each separate department. Mesdames et Messieurs, membres du comité, ceci met fin.
Members of the committee, this concludes my opening statement. I'm now ready to take your questions.
This concludes my opening comments, and we're available to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And we will now move over to the Liberal Party for the opening round of questions. Mr. Desange.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for appearing before us. Let me first deal with the misapprehension that you may have. It was not my understanding, nor of my colleagues here, that you were simply here to answer questions on the pre-appointment checks or security clearance. You were to answer questions on Kuya Bernier matter. And so in that context, let me ask you the first question. Have you made yourself familiar from all of the RCMP information and files that you may have with any matters relevant or related to the Kuya Bernier matter before you came here?
I am familiar with this matter. I am familiar with Ms. Couillard. However, it would be inappropriate for me to be talking about a specific case before this committee.
I appreciate that. Here's the question. You say you're familiar with Ms. Couillard. Can you then confirm in the usual police language that she was known to the RCMP?
Known to the RCMP, could you perhaps define a little more as to what you mean by known by the RCMP?
Well, I think that I would like you to define what you mean when you say someone is known to the RCMP.
Okay. What I answered my initial question was that I am familiar with this matter.
Yes.
I am familiar with Ms. Couillard. However, to talk about what exactly I am familiar with, the content of my familiarity.
I'm not asking you to tell me why you're familiar with her. I'm asking you to answer the question whether or not, before this matter broke in the news, whether she was known to the RCMP.
Yes, she was.
Thank you. With all of what's in the public domain, I will not ask you how much of the RCMP knew about her. With all of what's now in the public domain, whether or not she was under surveillance at some point, whether or not she had links with organized crime, the mob, the bikers, did it raise any red flags with the RCMP when she publicly began to associate with the Minister of Foreign Affairs?
Once again, to tell you whether or not this raised red flags, individuals, especially ministers, associate with a number of people by virtue of their job, constituents, etc. What we do when something of concern comes to us is we check for relevancy, reliability, accuracy, and determine what, if anything, needs to be done at that point.
Would you agree that it would be relevant for Canadians for you to look into Kuya Bernier matter if you knew that she was associating with him and she had, at least in the past, recent past, links with the mob or the bikers? Would you think that would be relevant?
That would be relevant, yes.
Let me ask you another question. You now know, at least I know from the public domain, some of the allegations may be true or not true. You know now that you may have heard Mr. Juno Katsuya, that there has been a national security breach with respect to the secret documents. I have two questions for you. One, having learnt that from the CSIS expert and having known all the facts, would the RCMP conduct an investigation to determine whether or not a criminal offense occurred in this matter?
Again, whether or not we conduct a criminal investigation would be inappropriate for me to talk about at this point. To tell you whether or not we would conduct a criminal investigation, where we have, whether we are, or whether we will in the future, could compromise the integrity of anything that we have done or will do.
Might I add something to that? Yes. I think it's important to point out, without speaking to the specific instant case, that where the RCMP becomes aware, either through the complaints of civilians or members of the community, or anybody else for that matter, yes, that there is a possible infraction, a criminal infraction, where there's reason to suspect that a criminal offense has taken place, then we would investigate that and report our findings to a court, ultimately for disposition. But we would not want to speak, because of, as the deputy pointed out, we would not want to compromise that investigation or any investigation in the future.
Let me ask you then, follow up on that. I have two questions. Do you now believe, based on what you may know from your own files and from the public domain, that there are reasonable grounds to conduct a criminal investigation in this matter, that an offense may have occurred?
If I might, Deputy.
Yes. And I have one more question.
I just want to direct your mind back to the preamble in your last question, where you talked about getting to know all the facts. It's important to have a full understanding of what all the facts are. With respect, I wasn't here when the previous witness spoke. I saw some of it on TV. And I think he went to some lengths to try to condition his responses based on the public reporting of some of these things that have gone on. So it's very important for us and the police to be mindful of the facts, to respect the notion of evidence, and to proceed in that manner.
I have one more question, and that is, has the RCMP had any role in the Kuya-Bernier matter to date, including the handling of the secret documents?
And you're specifically asking us with respect to our role on a very specific matter. And what I'm suggesting to you, Mr. Desange, is that whether or not we've had any role to date would be inappropriate for me to comment on, as it may affect the integrity of what it is that we may have or will be doing.
Let me narrow it for you. Have you had any role in the handling of the secret documents once everyone became aware, someone became aware that they were in the possession of Ms. Kuya? Were you involved in bringing them back to the Foreign Affairs? Were you involved in looking at them? Were you involved in taking them to the PCO, PMO?
No.
To all those questions, the answer is no?
Correct.
Thank you.
But I'd like to add something too, if I might, is that there again you suggested that they were secret documents. And the actual classification level of those documents is not entirely clear at this point, and that needs to be understood. So I just want to put that condition on the answer.
Okay, thank you.
No, I cannot, but I'm suggesting to you that neither can you tell us what they are.
That's why I use the word secret rather than level 1, level 2, level 3.
Right. Well, secret has a number of connotations in terms of the security clearance on it. With respect, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Monsieur Menard.
I understand that you are in charge of security at the highest level, and that if there is a risk for security that was to come up that was relevant enough, or that was, you would think that it was your duty to inform the PMO, would you not? Not the PMO, but the PCO. That would be the routing through the PCO. Fine. Do you think? Well, there are various types of relations between politicians with all sorts of individuals. The most intimate one, of course, is the equivalent of a marital relationship. And in that case, obviously, ministers are going to be working at home in hotel rooms that they're going to share. They're necessarily going to have conversations without necessarily thinking about security as a top-of-mind issue. Yes, I'm following you so far. if you have someone who has had an ongoing relationship for a number of years with organized crime, do you think that a minister who, perhaps without even knowing it, begins to have an intimate relationship with that individual should be informed of the risk that he might be running? Answer. Well, to answer your question, Mr. Maynard, if a situation of the type you described came to our attention, the first thing we would have to do would be to, well, if I could switch to English, please, just to be very specific in my answer.
To check for the relevancy of what it is that has come to my attention, the accuracy and reliability of what it is. I will not be guided simply by media reports or innuendos. I would do my own research, if you will, and if it's relevant, if it's reliable, if it's accurate, yes, I would bring it to the attention of PCO.
C'est exactement là que je voulais en arriver.
Yes, that's exactly what I was getting at. So you can consult criminal data banks, can you not? Yes, we can. And particularly in the case of motorcycle gangs in Quebec, the criminal data banks on motorcycle gangs have been combined, the ones from the Quebec Police Force, from the RCMP, and from the Montreal Police. They've been combined to get the results that were changed with the Kakadu squad. May I add another thing? As the Commissioner said a few moments ago, the options we have to track information that we get, the result may be that we'll have an investigation. We're going to inform the PCO. We're going to follow the situation, or we may do nothing, depending on our assessment of the information. Excuse me, Mr. Paulson, we don't have enough time to go into hypotheticals here. We are talking about a clear case here. There is someone, and you know it, this person had an ongoing, intimate relationship with various members of organized crime. The minister begins a relationship with that person, is running a certain risk. Would you agree with me? Answer. We cannot comment on the particular case here.
To make comments on the particular facts.
Bon. Alors, allons dans les hypothèses, dans le peu de temps que nous avons, n'est-ce pas?
Okay, then let's look at hypothetical cases. Let us assume that you were to conclude that there was a risk. Or that there might be a blackmail possibility or whatever, an undercover agent. Do you think that this type of risk is serious enough to inform the PCO?
Monsieur Menard, we are alive to what organized crime does. We're alive to what terrorist organizations may do. Organized crime, terrorism has been a priority for the RCMP for a number of years. We would look at every case with that in mind, and we would use whatever resources are available to us in order to be able to determine whether or not there is a threat either to the government or to individuals. The checks that are requested of us to do at the outset is only on the individual, not the individual's associates, only on the individual, the pre-appointment check. So in the case of a minister, it would be on the minister alone. Knowing that, and with the hypothetical situation that you have put forward, if it were to come to our attention, and knowing what we know, based on what we do, we would conduct all those checks, and if it were many options, as Assistant Commissioner Paulson said, many options. It could be that we do nothing. It could be that we do something. So from doing nothing to notifying PCO as to the results of our investigation, if you will.
On peut s'entendre sur dire que entre ces...
Could we agree that among these three extreme hypotheses, the more serious the risk, the more you would be inclined to inform the PCO. Yes, absolutely. Okay. And of course, it will depend on the duration of relationship, the type of relationship that the person had with organized crime, the number of such relationships, and so on. The nature of the threat, and the nature of the relationship. Yes. In this case, did you inform PCO? Did you alert them?
For me to speak about this specific case, as it would put the integrity of any action that we take in jeopardy.
You'll have to pose your final question. Do you have another short question? No? Ms. Pretty, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me ask about the criminal intelligence file. Does it include people who have not had convictions but have been under surveillance because of who they are acquainted with, who they are spending time with, etc.? I know that there's a bank of people who, who've been C-picked and they have a criminal conviction, etc. Does the other criminal intelligence bank have people who are simply, if you will, a watching brief on?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Secondly, it was mentioned earlier that if it is brought to the attention of the RCMP, could you tell me what brought to the attention means? And I'm trying to think about, is this somebody has to make a phone call to bring it to the attention, or a written complaint? Or what if an RCMP officer who knows who Ms. Couillard is quite well and sees the front page of the paper with Mr. Bernier being sworn in, or somebody, not for lack of, for moving it along, not on that story, sees someone in a public environment with someone that they know is part of a criminal intelligence file, or that they have information on, do they have a responsibility to, would that be bringing it to someone's attention, or would someone simply wait until it had taken a couple steps forward in terms of a more formal brought to the attention of police?
I think the answer is pretty well yes to all. We all have a responsibility for public safety, public security, and it could come to our attention in a number of ways. It could come to our attention through a media article that could be completely false, and we could check it out and discount it. It could come from human sources that we have. It could come from individuals such as yourself, complainants, from an officer observing it. It could come from a variety of ways.
Okay. In your description of the security process, the security clearance process, you say may also involve interviews with an individual's family members, friends, etc. What does the may depend on?
Well, I think you're referring to the, if I may use the term, full-blown security clearance. We distinguish between the pre-appointment background checks, which is
I understand.
Okay, and then the security clearance at the top secret level, for example, would feature the most robust canvassing of the associates of the person in question, to include field interviews, perhaps with neighbors, with associates, with former employers, with references. So that's what it refers to.
And would a foreign...
If I may, please, the may also depend on, as a background investigation unfolds, and you scratch and something seems to come up, you may decide to look a little deeper and interview a second person, a third person, and so on, until the person conducting the interviews is satisfied that he or she has canvassed all possibilities.
And would ministers who have access to a even higher level of security documents, perhaps the Minister of Public Safety, Foreign Affairs, etc., be subject to that higher security check than the pre-appointment one?
I'm not aware of that, and you'd have to ask either PCO or the Department of Public Safety.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any feelings about whether partners of elected politicians or elected cabinet ministers, appointed cabinet ministers, I guess, but elected, should be in any way checked out?
This is a matter, I think, of government machinery, government policy, and something that I think PCO may be better able to answer, and something that perhaps all of you may have a say as to whether or not this is something that you would want to expose yourself to or not.
Okay, but do you have an opinion?
I don't think it would be appropriate for me to give an opinion. Obviously, every process that's in place can be improved.
Yes.
And improving on a process would, again, have a balance of confidentiality, security, public policy, public machinery, and so on.
My understanding is that Ms. Couillard and Mr. Bernier were at a reception with the President of the United States, and my understanding is that the Americans would presume or expect that anybody who the Canadian was part of a Canadian delegation or was from Canada would have been checked here, and therefore they wouldn't check necessarily on the American side. Who would do that checking here if it was somebody taking a partner with them? Is it you? Is it CSIS? Who is it?
I don't believe it's us, not to my knowledge. Our job would be to provide physical security for ministers that require physical security during such events.
But you would not be doing any of the checking of other people who were going?
Not to my knowledge, no.
I think it's important, if I might add quickly, that each department has a departmental security officer, and they are responsible, along with the other officials in the departments, to look at the background and reliability of those persons that are accompanying dignitaries and so on. And as the deputy said, we look after the security and the site security and so on.
Okay, now that I understand. And just one more, if I might. What is the process? I mean, does it sort of work its way up from whoever has first brought it into the RCMP as information up to you and then up to the Privy Council, or through the Commissioner to the Privy Council? Like, what does that chain look like?
I'm sorry, I don't follow your question. In terms of which information?
Well, information that you think might need to be passed on to government because there might be a risk. So does that go are there particular designations of people in the RCMP who would receive that information, say, yes, this should move on, and then somebody else sees it and says, yes, this should move on to the Commissioner, and the Commissioner then makes the decision about, yes, it should move on to Privy Council?
If it's something that would go back to Privy Council, it would go back through the Commissioner's office, yes. However, as it comes in, it could come in at any level. Any member of the public can complain to a member in uniform, complain to any member of the RCMP, and it could work its way up. Once a decision is made that PCO need to be notified, it will go through the Commissioner's office, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go over to Mr. McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here. I think you bring a very important aspect to this committee, and I guess I couldn't agree more with what you had to say about people making decisions based on a little bit of information instead of having all of the information. And certainly I think what we're hearing and seeing is some people jumping to some conclusions, both around this place and in the media. And so I do appreciate, and I think all of our panel and people that are watching this do appreciate the tenor of what you've presented to us here today. And I guess my first question would be, as I did ask the last panelist, is that there are sometimes people who don't want to look at the law as it is, but the law as it should be, or the rules as they are and the rules that they should be. But has anything changed with respect to what your organization does, say in the last 5, 7, or 10 years, with respect to security checks for cabinet ministers?
No, in fact, I believe it goes much further back than that. That's been the process in place, and that's what's been asked of us.
And I guess the other thing that I have a serious problem trying to comprehend is we have a number of people, particularly around this House, who talk about having had the information for some time, heard things in different places, and didn't bring that information forward. If they had that concerns, they could have brought that information forward, I'm sure, and I'm sure in my mind, but you tell me if I'm wrong. They could have brought that information forward to the RCMP. They could have then evaluated that information, and then based on the strength of the information and the evaluation, acted upon it.
Absolutely, and that was my initial point, in that we're more than willing to look into any situation that could cause a security issue, a security concern, And what we have to do, though, is not simply accept it, but verify its accuracy, reliability, validity, and deal with it from that point on.
And my friends have talked about intelligence information, and some of us on this side are not totally devoid of some practices. A great deal of intelligence information is developed from innocent gossip or conversations that take place in places like restaurants and beauty salons that get passed to the police, and then the information is then verified and becomes something that's workable for the police agencies?
Correct, and that's basically the difference between information and intelligence, whether it's verified as accurate, and so there's a process, an objectivity process, that it goes through and becomes actual intelligence.
So there, I guess just to be final on it, there is a process. If somebody has a legitimate concern, if they think they know, if they believe they know, or they've only heard, they have that ability to pass it on and then have the information either verified one way or another.
And we rely on that to some extent in our day-to-day work.
Okay. The other part is when these checks take place for the PCO, we don't go back, or it hasn't been a practice to go back in 6 months and redo them. And when you talked about spouses, I'm not sure if that involved friends or acquaintances, but nothing has changed with respect to that whole process in a number of years.
Nothing has changed as far back as I remember. I believe it goes back to somewhere in the mid-'80s, where only the individual that is subject to the background check, their name is provided to us, and we do our criminal record check, we do our database checks, we do checks with municipal, provincial police forces only on the individual, not on spouses, not on children, not on friends, not on neighbors.
Very good. Thank you.
Sharing your time with...
Do you want some time?
No, no question. Nobody sharing. Okay, we will now begin the second round. Who from the... Ms. Jennings? Okay.
Oui, merci, et je vais partager mon temps.
Yes, thanks. And I'll be sharing my time with Ms. Barnes. Excuse me. You said that the pre-appointment background could include ministers and senators and so on, and that would be just the candidate whose background is checked. But there's also what you call a security clearance, and the objective there is to check into a person's reliability, as we heard earlier, reliability, integrity, and vulnerability, and that this clearance check is much more comprehensive, may include the partner, neighbors, children, relatives, and so on. Do you regularly do security clearance checks on ministers? No, not ministers. Ministers are not subject to security clearances by us, having to do with their family. So, whatever level of security a minister has, a minister is never subject regularly to a security clearance. It is up to the minister's department to do the security clearance, and the minister's department, because you say that this can include much more than just a check as to whether the person has a criminal record. That means that the department at some point is going to have to ask for some help from the RCMP to get access to information that is privileged in nature, and that no one in the department would be entitled to have access to without the intervention of the RCMP. Yes, that's right. Sometimes there are agreements between certain departments and us with respect to these clearances. Do you have such an agreement with the Department of Foreign Affairs to do security clearances? And I'm not referring to any specific case. But these rules and processes have been in place since the 80s, you say. Since the 80s, has the RCMP ever had to do a security check on a Minister of Foreign Affairs? Or the department as it was called at the time? Well, I'll give you my answer in English because I want to be very precise.
That have conducted the security clearance process would, in the normal course of the clearance process, submit the background checks of those individuals who are identified in the application for the particular clearance of the individual who is seeking the clearance. And in that respect, we would do those background checks. But as to your yes or no proposition as to whether or not we have done that for a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I cannot give you an answer to that.
Well, I'm taking directly from your statement, and you say security clearances are separate
Yes.
from the pre-appointment background check process. Now you're talking about security clearance and background check. You just said here it's two different things.
Right.
Right. So I'm asking, beyond the pre-appointment background check process, has the RCMP, since the current system has been put into place, which according to Mr. Sukar is following since the 1980s, has the RCMP ever been asked to do a security clearance on a minister?
Okay, just to go back, the security clearances are done
Which
within...
would involve assessing the reliability and loyalty of the minister before he or she was given access to classified information. Simple question.
And I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability and to the best of my knowledge. Every department is responsible for their own security clearance process. That's separate from the pre-appointment checks from PCO. So any department will do their own security clearance, their own security background checks. They have their own department security operations officer.
I understand
There may be, depending on the department, an agreement to conduct perhaps a CPIC inquiry on an individual. And then we would respond back to the department, and then they would carry on with their own background checks. They would do their own interviews. They would do everything else that remains to be done on the security clearance. So every department has their own department security operations officer.
And I'm asking
thank
about
you.
Foreign Affairs specifically.
Okay, we'll have to move over to the block now. Is it Ms. Menard?
I apologize,
Or
Ms.
Ms.
Barnes.
Tilak? Mr. Menard, go ahead, sir.
I want to clarify one thing. If you have information to give to the Prime Minister, you're going to give it to the Privy Council, is that correct? Yes. We wouldn't call the Prime Minister or the PMO, rather the Privy Council. You don't call his Chief of Staff, you will simply call the PCO. Yes, because it is PCO that launches the whole process. They're the ones who request the background checks. So we get back to them because they're the ones that asked for the check in the first place. I understand. Well, essentially, you think that you shouldn't say anything to us about the specific case of Mr. Bernier and his relationship with Ms. Couillard. That's right. Does it sometimes happen that in a minister's office there is a situation that may be a risk to security? Does that sometimes happen? In such cases, would you continue not to investigate, or would you inform the Privy Council that there is a situation developing in Cabinet of a Minister? Well, as soon as we notice, as soon as something comes to our attention, the first thing we do is to check whether the information we've been given, well, I understand all that, whether it's reliable information, whether it's good information, and if so, and if we continue to be concerned, okay, you've said that about 5 times, we understand that, but let us assume that you have got some reliable information and that after your investigation, you continue to think that there is a risk to security, then are you going to inform the Privy Council? We would inform the Privy Council, yes, we would. We'd inform PCO. If you notice that in the personal life of a minister, a relationship develops that could amount to a security breach and that you're satisfied with the information and after checking and so on, but you think that there is a risk to security, are you going to inform PCO? Yes. If we think that there could be a cause for concern, we would inform PCO. Okay. Now, you're familiar with criminal organizations in Canada, particularly the motorcycle gangs. Yes. And like the previous witness, perhaps even better than him, you know the regular attempts that they make, that they put moles wherever they can. You're familiar with that? Yes. So, if you have some information that you've checked and through your databases and you think that the information is reliable, then that there is a reasonable possibility, perhaps without the minister's knowledge, that this minister is about to start a relationship with a mole. Do you think that the PCO should be informed? Yes. If the situation is one that we're concerned about, yes, definitely. If someone who's had a relationship, an intimate relationship over a number of years with members of organized crime, would such an individual represent a security risk? It's possible? Okay. Now, if that individual could come into the presence of some very confidential documents, either in the minister's room, at his house, or at her house, or wherever, do you think that there is a security risk that would be worth mentioning to the PCO? Well, security documents are not to be shared with anyone, whether it is someone associated with organized crime or not. If it is a person who doesn't have the appropriate security classification, then the document should not be shared. I read of Margaret Trudeau that she hated the black binders that Mr. Trudeau used to bring home in the evening. He mustn't have been the only Prime Minister who worked at home, and you can imagine that a number of ministers work at home as well. So they wouldn't always be studying their documents. So if the person is a mole, the person could open up these documents and have a look. Yes. So will you ensure, when this is an unusual relationship, that you'd be prepared to go into your database, to put that person's name in and see whether or not there is reliable information about her ties to organized crime?
De nouveau, Monsieur Ménard.
Once again, Mr. Ménard, if a situation crops up, it is brought to our attention and we are concerned about it, obviously, we would inform PCO.
Mr. Norlock, please.
Well, thank you very much for coming today, gentlemen. I know you're being asked a lot of hypothetical questions about hypothetical situations, so those can be hypothetically turned into advantageous political ammunition. However, I know that you will answer and have answered, and I appreciate your answers coming forth in a very forthright manner. I guess the question I have to ask is based on some of the questioning at the beginning of today's proceedings and your being here. And that's the fine line that in the job that you have, whether it be national security or just straight law enforcement, the fine line you have between respecting the personal lives of individuals and what you may, or I believe is referred to as white intelligence. That's the stuff you get out in the community from the newspapers. That can sometimes be salacious gossip from different forums. And I was listening intently when you were talking about obtaining information from various sources. And I'd just like you to confirm with me that some of those sources could actually be the newspaper. Some of those sources could actually be someone who says something to somebody who thought that you should know about it. Would I be correct in saying that could be a source of information?
Absolutely, yes.
And the important part of your answer, I believe, and I think it's necessary to remind people who are watching this so that they know exactly what you were referring to, that it could be in the newspaper, but that if the impression is that the police didn't do something about it, it's because they actually did do a threat assessment on the information or an assessment as to its criminality and made a determination that in this particular case there would be insufficient grounds to begin an investigation in a particular case, because we're talking hypothetically. And that at the same time, having regard for the individual you may be investigating, that the investigation itself could be construed in some quarters as there having been something done wrong, or something having been done wrong would be the appropriate English. Would I be correct?
You would. I mean, the reacting to newspaper or gossip by unleashing a massive investigation is not what we do. We verify what it is we do. Information comes in, we'll accept any type of information that comes in. As I said earlier, we depend on everybody, on the general public. Public security is something that rests with all of us. And we encourage people to come and talk to us. And if anyone has any information that could be of concern to us, we would welcome that information. But we don't accept it and unleash an investigation right away. We need to verify its accuracy, its reliability. That's how we differentiate between gossip or unreliable information versus reliable one that are worthy of the next step, and that is investigation.
And if I could add something, Deputy, too, I think it's important for the committee to understand the level of complexity that attaches to investigations in today's environment, with the need to respect the various statutes, the most important one being Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Privacy Act, all of those provisions that give us the level of living that we like here. And I'm not complaining. I'm just illustrating for you that it is a complex legal and process environment that we have to manage, and it's not well managed in the public arena. So that's all I had to add.
Well, that's exactly where the direction of my question was going in. And I was going to bring up those two very important acts that every citizen, from the highest position in the land down, well, we're all equal, but that we all have a responsibility, number one, to each other, to make sure that we respect each other's rights, and even more so as police officers and holders of certain holders of the authority of arrest and detention, that you have to ensure that anything that you do doesn't do more harm than the accusation or the potential information. And as I go down that line, and I was just asked a question by one of my colleagues. The responsibility of every one of us, if we know something, to bring that information forward. And when we do realize that we have crossed the line, when we do realize we may have exceeded either our authority or we have made a mistake, that we do the responsible thing and we take responsibility for it. We take it upon our shoulders to right the wrong. And I think one of the things that we need to talk about, since can't talk about the specifics, but but some of the individuals in this case have, I mean, the minister has resigned his position and done the right thing. But I think it's necessary for every citizen to realize that we have to take responsibility and do the right thing.
Okay, I didn't detect a question there. Ms. Barnes.
Much, Chair, and thank you very much for appearing today. And I understand the difficulty of what you can say and what you can't say, but maybe in general, I mean, we're talking here about security clearances, but that's not the only way that the RCMP interacts with the minister. For instance, can you tell me whether or not the RCMP would accompany a minister on, say, international travels or his functions even inside the country on a one-on-one basis?
Not generally. Depending on the minister, depending on any threat assessment that may be conducted on the particular minister as to whether or not they require any type of security. If the threat assessment is conducted and security is required, it's then assessed at what level it's required, and they would be provided with a package, a security package commensurate with that assessment.
Okay. And assuming that the RCMP has a threat assessment and there is an accompanying RCMP officer, would that RCMP officer be fully briefed about the minister he's with, the people that you anticipate being around that minister?
The security team would be briefed on the nature of the threat assessment, not on the minister's personal life. If he's accompanied by someone, certainly that person would be known to the security team, security detail.
And if there was any concern about that person, what would be the procedure that you would expect of your RCMP officer on passing on that information?
If there was what type of concern are we talking about? Security concern?
If the RCMP officer who was accompanying the minister was aware of, say, some interaction with peoples where that would raise a level of concern, what would you expect in your normal procedure protocol for that officer to do with that information?
I just want to make sure I follow your question. If there is a concern that the person with the minister...
Say, for instance, and I don't want to get into the hypotheticals, but say the RCMP officer saw people that would have been known to you and be of interest to you from a security point of view, whether it was organized crime, whether it was other individuals, what would you expect that RCMP officer who was with the minister to do with that information in your normal procedure or protocol?
I think exactly as I detailed earlier, if that concern was known from one of our officers, that potential threat, security threat, would be assessed.
Okay.
To see how the validity of it, it's how it relates to the activity taking place, be it travel, how it relates to security issues, whether it's classification of documents as we talked about earlier, whatever the nature of the threat is, it's assessed, and based on that, a determination is made whether or not to notify PCO.
Earlier you said that you would do, if you had information, you would go from the range of doing nothing or turning the information to the proper source. In what instance, is there any other instance other than do not seeing a security threat that you would do nothing? In other words, you would have to be assured yourselves that there is no threat. That would be the one and only reason that you would do nothing with the information.
I'm not sure I followed.
Well, let me take a crack at it, because it's important that we understand the distinction between the protective function that the officers accompanying those ministers for whom there has been a threat identified, that the protective function that they must perform. Now, if in the course of those duties they observe behavior which is criminal, it doesn't matter who's doing that. I mean, they're duty-bound to uphold the law. If they observe conduct of people that are around the person, the dignitary, say, that's not altogether uncommon, because in those travels, the dignitaries often interact with wide cross-sections of our communities, which unfortunately sometimes contain criminals. And as we've agreed with Mr. Menard, organized crime and terrorist groups try to access influence, try to access our institutions. And so then there's that component. But we shouldn't confuse the protective duties of the officers on the road apart from their natural sort of base police responsibilities, from this other interaction with people in the road. But we would expect that officers observing suspicious conduct that would raise their suspicions that perhaps organized crime or a terrorist group is trying to influence our institutions, that they would raise that with us, and as the deputy said, we would engage in an investigation.
Thank you. I don't think you quite answered my question. What I was trying to get at...
It's not for lack of trying.
Yeah, I realize. So I'll try and rephrase it one more time. You said that you would go from doing nothing with the information to doing the moving along.
What I was talking about there was the range. And when I said doing nothing, we would perhaps have assessed the information as being so what information. That's none of our business. We got to let that go.
And that's the only reason. I just wanted you to put on the record that would be the only. There would be no other reason that you would do nothing.
No. I don't think, and I'll let the deputy talk about that. But we may do nothing because we want to protect an investigation. We may do nothing in terms of advising people because that would infringe upon the integrity of such an investigation or an investigation in the future. That may be a condition too.
That's better. Thank you.
No other comments?
Yeah.
It's clear.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next on our list is Mr. Mays, please.
Mr. Chair, and I just want to say to the witnesses, I appreciate the sensitivity to the individual rights of the people that are involved in this inquiry. So I really appreciate the way you've handled the questions. I just wanted to know what is the appropriate response. If the rules and procedures for handling of classified documents are broken, and the PMO's offices, the PMO is notified, is the appropriate response from the PMO's office, 1, to contact the individual that broke the security procedures, 2, accept the resignation of the individual if the report is true, 3, ask those responsible for those documents, the department or the ministry, to confirm the classification of the documents and also assess the severity of the breach? Would that be an appropriate response?
I think you've covered the range of possible responses, from the extreme, I suppose, a resignation, to an investigation as to the nature of the documents and the facts surrounding the misuse, I think, as you put it, of the documents.
Would you say that if the department were to exhaust their ability to investigate either the classification of the documents, well, they should know that, but the severity of the breach, that the next step would likely be to engage the RCMP and ask the RCMP to assist them in that investigation?
Typically, that would be the nature of the course of business, yes.
So you haven't been asked currently to engage in that investigation?
Again, it would be inappropriate for me to comment as to whether or not we have commenced anything or are planning on commencing something.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add, sir, that I think it's important in terms of talking about the handling of classified material. Again, the range of activity that could occur there in terms of misconduct around that material could be, in the ordinary course of business of government employee X, negligence, inattentiveness, which doesn't sort of hit the criminal conduct threshold, and then there is the intentional distribution, espionage type activity at the other spectrum, right? And so you don't always need a bulldozer to clean out your backyard. And so there needs to be an assessment as to what indeed is happening and what are the circumstances that are going on there. But if there's evidence of criminality, we are obligated and duty-bound to investigate that once we have that suggestion.
Thank you.
Are you sharing time, Mr. McKenzie?
Yeah, thank you again. I'd just like to revisit something, and I think it's where Ms. Brown was going here. If you're security people, well, I guess very difficult to determine, but security people do not necessarily know everybody in Canada that's associated with or have been involved with organized crime or terrorist groups or whatever. It would be a big jump in an assumption to know that 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 members of the RCMP who are very knowledgeable people, but it's impossible for all of them to know and recognize by face who the people are. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I would not confine it only to protective officers. I would confine that to any police officer, whether that officer works in the sphere of organized crime or not, to know everyone involved in that sphere of activity.
And typically, intelligence files are built by unknowns, but ultimately they go nowhere if we don't know a name and have a name to associate it with. Whether it's security or drug files or whatever it might be, there's an awful lot of information that sits in files, and nobody has a name. You can't associate it to anybody, and you can't verify backwards who it is.
Sometimes that happens, yes.
And it's, I think, only fair to say that that's true of all police officers involved in intelligence, that to know all the names and all the people, all the players, is a virtual impossibility.
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay. My other question was, and I think dealing with who you report your information to, and I know there's been a lot of questions around in the House particularly about did so-and-so know, did so-and-so know, or was it reported by authorities? But the RCMP report your information to the PCO. Is that the appropriate channel for?
Correct. It goes from RCMP to PCO.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's not to go around the hill to different senior levels and report. It's to the PCO, who then handle the information and do as they are mandated through rules and regulations to follow.
Absolutely. That's where the request originates, and that's where a response goes to.
Okay. How are we doing for time, Chair?
I'm distracted here. Yeah, I wasn't listening. Are you just about done?
If there's nobody else, is there somebody else there?
Yeah, Mr. Desange has got a question.
The last time we checked, Mr. McKenzie, PCO was at the center of the government. But let me just ask the question, though. When did the RCMP become aware of Madame Couillard's relationship with the then Foreign Affairs Minister? And I can tell you there's no security breach or prejudicing of the investigation that you might be carrying on by simply answering that question. No, yes, we can. Public can be the judge sometimes.
I don't have any knowledge.
That I saw Madame Couillard accompany the minister to Rideau Hall in his swearing-in ceremony when he was the minister of when he was appointed to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
And you knew of Ms. Couillard at that point in the sense that she was known to the police?
No, I personally did not know her, although I think, as the deputy has indicated, the RCMP knows Madame Couillard.
And it was known to the RCMP at least that day that was Madame Couillard with Mr. Bernier?
No, I
No,
didn't.
but that's the question I'm asking. When did the RCMP come to know that Madame Couillard, it was Madame Couillard who was walking with him, and it was Madame Couillard who had a relationship with the then Foreign Affairs Minister?
I have no idea as to exactly at what point. As I said at the outset, we know who Ms. Couillard is, but at what point a connection was made as to I, like Assistant Commissioner Polson, saw during the ceremony, the swearing-in ceremony, but in terms of anything greater than that,
I would like to know, and I'd like to ask you to provide that information to us. Check your files. I would like to know, when did the RCMP know that it was Madame Couillard with vast connections to organized crime that was in a relationship with the Foreign Affairs Minister? Thank you.
Okay, you're done. Mr. Brown, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know we've only got a minute or two left, so I really have just one question. But in retrospect, Do you think it would be advisable that ministers be re-vetted in anything in addition to, that might be of interest with security concerns about any other ongoing relationships when they are moved from one cabinet post to another? Do you think they should get re-vetted at that point?
Well, I believe that they do when they go from one post to another with the process that's in place right now, which is a background check on the individual alone. So as they move from public safety to justice or whatever it may be, from one post to another, I believe that they go through the process again, but once again, it's only on the individual. It's not on spouses, friends, children, parents, so on.
Right. But was that done when that cabinet shuffle happened, that ministers that moved, were they re-vetted at that point?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our witnesses for coming here. You've given us a good outline of the procedures that you have in regard to security. Appreciate it very much. This meeting stands adjourned.